Whoa, guess what this is? It's a coloring tutorial because I wanted to make a coloring tutorial. Merry Christmas, holidays, happy winter, New Year, summer. I don't know. Um, yeah, so this is a tutorial made specifically for using the program of Fire Alpaca, but pretty much all the stuff I use, all the things I do in this tutorial, you can do in most other programs as long as it's not something like MS Paint levels of crudiness. So this is made with Fire Alpaca. You can find Fire Alpaca is a very nice free program that I really like. That's what I use for pretty much all of my art, and I will link it in the description if you want to check it out. But you can probably do this with pretty much any program that uses layers or that kind of thing. So first things first, this character that I'm drawing here, his name is Jark. He's an OC that my friend Envarki has. I linked her in the description. Her art is really, really cool, and I like Jark, and I like her art, and I like her. So please go love her and this character. So first you're going to want to have some line art. I'm not really going to go over lines for this tutorial because this is specifically a coloring tutorial, and I don't really have much to say about line art, but you know, just have some line art. Line art is cool. Yeah. So the first real step to coloring is flat colors. These are pretty self-explanatory. Make a new layer underneath your line art layer and fill in all of the layers that you want to have, or all the areas you want to have colored with the color they're supposed to be. This is like coloring in the lines in kindergarten. Hopefully you're better at coloring lines now than you were in kindergarten. Just try to get yourself a good base of color. A good technique that I normally use is I'll fill in the whole thing, all of the lines, with one single color, and then I'll use this nice nifty function called block alpha, or it might be called alpha block or something for other programs. And once you turn that on, you won't be able to color outside anything you've already colored on that layer. So it's really, really, really useful for this. So you can make a whole base color, base layer in one color, and then go back over with all the colors that things are actually supposed to be. And that's a really easy way to get your flat color layer done. So the second step is to color your character's eyes. This doesn't really, it's sort of like step 1.5 here. I have a really weird special way to color eyes that I totally did not steal from another artist. I totally stole it from Lulu Marie. I'll also link her tutorial for this in the description because it's basically just what I do, because I basically just stole from her tutorial. It's not stealing, it's inspiration, it's art. Anyway, you're gonna wanna color in the base color of the iris, like just his eye, or Dark's eyes. One is brown and one is blue. Then you're gonna want to take a darker, more saturated color that you like color shift a little bit. So blues will normally shift towards purples, oranges will shift towards red. Just like shift everything towards purple a little bit more, and make it a little bit more saturated and a little darker, and go over and make a couple stripes of like shading over the iris like this. And once you get to one that's like pretty close to black, like then you can draw the pupil in that one and do a ring around their iris, and it really helps attract, especially the ring around the outside of the iris really helps attract the eye to the iris. And later on you can either add more like highlights in this stage, or you can add more highlights to the eye in a later stage as well, so I'll probably go over that more then. So the third step is shading. So you're going to want to create a new layer and use this tool called clipping to clip it to your base layer. Clipping is sort of like block alpha is, except it masks to the layer underneath it instead of the layer itself. So this is really good because you're going to want this to be a different layer mode, so set the layer mode to multiply. This will make everything on it darker. Multiply is a really, really good layer mode for shading. So set the layer mode to multiply, and you're almost ready to start shading. First you're going to want to think about what color you're going to shade your character with. So this is where it's good to know a little bit of color theory. You don't need to know a whole lot, just like a little bit of like what kind of colors look good together. So colors that are like close to each other on the color wheel are like an analogous color scheme, or like colors that are completely opposite are a complementary color scheme. And you can probably look up more information about like color theory like this. I won't really go over it here because I want to keep this tutorial relatively short, but just figure out like a color that looks kind of good with it, and just start and with the colors of your character. I had a little bit of issues here in this drawing because I couldn't find a color scheme. I think I ended up going with a triadic color scheme of like blue, indigo blue and pink and like a yellow green, but but you're just, if you're not finding a color that perfectly works yet, you can always adjust it later because it is digital and you can do color hue shifts. But you're going to want to pick a color that's fairly saturated, maybe not full saturation because that can be a little bit hard on like your viewer's eyes, but something fairly saturated, you know, not too dark, not really a tone, just pretty much full color. And then on this layer set to multiply that's clipped to your base color layer, you're going to want to start shading where the shadows would fall. And that's always a really annoying thing about like shading tutorials, is artists just say, well, put the shadows where the shadows would be, and that doesn't really tell you much. But that's really, it just takes practice knowing where the shadows should go. So just think about like your light source, where you have your light source positioned. Normally it's above your character somewhere, maybe off to the side a little bit, and just given the shape, like think of your character, even though you're doing two-dimensional art, think of your character three-dimensionally and where that light would sort of hit on them. And it really does take practice, and if you're having a lot of issues with it, you can look up like reference pictures, and that can be a huge help. But until then, it really just takes practice to figure out where it goes and fiddling, but you know, just know that eventually you'll get better even if you're having a hard time now. Just sort of shade where the shadows would go and finish that layer up, and it'll look pretty nice. So if you did all that shading and then decided that you really didn't like the color you picked to shade because you were mistaken about what colors looked good together, because, you know, that happens. It's really easy to fix that. Depending on your program and depending on how you have your program set up, the command for this might be different, and like your computer, but for my Fire Alpaca on a Mac, the command to do color shift it, to bring up the color shift menu, is Command U. And if that's not what it is for your computer, I'm sure it is pretty easy to find in the menus somewhere. But bring up that panel and it'll look something like what's on the screen now. And you can just fiddle with that and fiddle with the hue slider specifically until you get a color that you like. And if for some reason it's too dark or too light or too bright or not bright enough, there's also saturation and brightness that you can also fiddle around with. And if you're on a fancier program than Fire Alpaca, you might have other sliders too. I'm sorry that I cannot tell you anything about those because I only know how Fire Alpaca works. But just screw around with those until you find a color that you like. And even if you did like the color you had originally, sometimes it is useful to screw around with this a little bit even on top of that, because you might find a color that you like more. So I generally do this for whatever I'm doing, whether, you know, I like the original color I picked to shade or not. Here I think I really didn't, and so I found a drastically different color. So yep. So the next step is step 4. This is also shading. So I normally do multiple shading layers at a time to sort of bring out interesting colors in the piece. So I'll choose another color that also fits in this color scheme. Normally this is often a dark blue or a dark purple or maybe like a dark pinkish color, but not necessarily. It really depends on the color palette, and this will be a little bit darker than the first shading color I used maybe, but it's still very high saturation. So create another multiply layer, and once again clip this to your base layer and choose another color that works with your character. Generally the angle of the light source for this one is a little bit different than the one that I chose for the first layer. And well, in real life this doesn't often happen unless there's like actually multiple light sources. It generally makes your, or I found that it makes my art look a lot more interesting, because instead of just having like a level with no shading, a level with shading layer 1, and a level with both shading layers, you've got a level with no shading, a level with shading layer 1, a level with only shading layer 2, and then a layer with both shading layers. And so it brings out a lot more of this color, and it creates a lot more interest. So even though it's technically not always what happens in real life, it looks a lot neater, and it looks a lot, well, maybe not neater, but a lot cooler, and in my personal opinion. So I normally shift that light angle a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit to sort of bring that out. And then once again, like the first shading layer, I'll go over it, I'll fill in all of the shading for this layer, and then if I don't like the color I picked, I will shift the hue or the opacity of the layer a little bit to fix it. It's time for step 5! So exciting! Step 5 is still shading. I will normally not just have 2 shading layers, I'll normally have a lot more than that, because there will be a lot of shading layers that are just like little things. Look for like the areas on your character that would be the most in shadow and make those much darker and like add some shading there, or sometimes I'll just add, like, I'll take an airbrush tool on a or another soft brush tool on a very, very high size and low opacity, and just airbrush some shading on, like, around the edges of the picture, so to draw the eye in, like, towards the focal point of the piece. And this is normally your character's eyes, but it might not be, but so just, like, pick out the focal point of your picture and then airbrush sort of around the edges to sort of draw your eye up in, so you're not, like, just staring at the bottom of your picture, because that's the brightest part or the highest contrast part for whatever reason. So just kind of push the areas that you don't really want the eye to see as much back into the background, and let the parts that you do want people to mostly spend most of their time looking at, like the focal point, to pop forward. Are y'all ready for a step that finally isn't shading? Yeah, it's step 6. Step 6 is highlights. So one of the really recognizable things, or at least one of the things I think is really recognizable about my style, is I do these very, like, strong, bright edge highlights, like along the edge where the light source is. And so, like, you'll see this in a lot of my work. There's, like, a very, like, my work that makes it sound like I actually know what I'm doing. I don't. Hint, I don't. But you want to, this is one of my favorite things to do, because it adds so much life to your art. So make a new layer above all of your multiply layers, and this should also be clipped to your base layer just to make your life convenient, and pick yet a third color that you haven't used for shading yet that fits still in your color palette. And you're going to want to make this pretty bright. Depending on what hue this is, you might want to add more or less white to it. So it might be a tint, might be more of a tint, like closer to white, or it might be just more close to just full saturation of the color, depending on what color it is. Really find something that works well. Normally, like pinks and reds, I have to make them much more of tints than any other colors, and yellows especially, I have to bring them much closer to full saturation. But pick a color that works for your character. I started highlighting this, I think, in orange. I don't actually have the piece in front of me. I think I started highlighting this in orange, but I ended up going with, like, a chartreuse color for the highlight for this one, because I didn't know what color to highlight it with at first. But just pick a color that works with your character. You can always change it later using the hue shift. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to remember that light source that you picked, and along, like, find the direction that light source is in, and along every edge sort of that your character has facing that light source, pick that out, like draw along that edge, like next to the line art. And you can sort of see what I'm doing here in the recording. I just find the edges, like especially in hair, this is really good, and like dark areas where you lost a lot of detail, like I said, this is often hair, to really pick out where your line art had been and just those edges, and it makes it really, really pop. You can be pretty dang liberal with this, just as long as it's, like, not totally random, it'll look really cool. So, and just find those edges and pull them out, and it'll look really cool. Another thing I normally do with this highlight layer is I'll go back onto the eyes. Remember how I said I was going to come back to the eyes? I'll make a ring around the pupil. And since this is usually a really, really bright color on top of a really, really dark color, this adds a whole lot of contrast, which makes people's eyes jump right to your character's eyes, which is really good because the eyes of your character are almost always the focal point of the piece. And so that'll make it look really, really rad. One more thing I normally do with this highlight color is I'll add a gradient. I don't remember if I did this with this piece or not, but I will often add a gradient. You usually have a gradient tool, but if you don't, you can just do like Lock Alpha with a soft, like, airbrush type brush and do it like that. But I'll find another color that's, like, sort of similar, and I'll make a gradient just to make the highlight layer look a lot more, have a little bit more interest in just being one color. And so I'll, like, gradient from, like, a yellow to a blue, that's pretty common, or a yellow to a pink, or a pink to a blue, or the pink to a green. I don't think I've ever done that, but that might get kind of muddy. But depending on what colors look good with your palette, it could be pretty much anything. So that's the highlight layer, and that's probably my favorite part. So step 7 is, like, additional reflections. So surfaces like hair, metal, and glass are a lot more reflective than, like, skin and fabric. So you're gonna want to show that they're different materials and that they're, like, made out of something else. So what I'll do normally is I have a pretty simple way to show this, like, extra reflection. I will make a layer like beneath my highlight layer, like the highlight layer I just made, but above all of my multiply layers, and I will set this layer to opacity. which is a layer mode. And then I will pick a color that is either white or like close to white, and like add in where the reflection would be. So long hair, this is sort of like, if you look at people's hair, it sort of bends, like it's, even like people with straight hair, it like is a little bit wavy usually, and so like these sections that like the white, that they're sort of like bent toward the light will reflect a lot more light than like the things that are bent away from it. So just like sort of those, is it concave or convex? I think it's convex, and the convex part of the hair will reflect a lot more light. And so you're gonna just like sort of draw a stripe. I will draw a stripe across this thing, and then I'll pick out darker hairs individually to make this look sort of like a hair reflection. And you can work this more to make it look more realistic. I kind of like just like the blocky stripe look to it, but that's just me. Then also like glass, like I said, and metal, you can also pick out sort of, I'll pick out an edge near the light source and then add a couple stripes to show that it's shiny. It's not super anatomical, it's not super like realistic, but it gets the job done. It conveys your message, which is often what you're trying to do. Step 8 is coloring the line art. So if you were smart enough to like separate your line art into multiple layers back when you were drawing your line art, I wasn't in this drawing, but if you were smart enough, you were smarter than me, it'll make your life a little bit easier here, but you can do it either way. What you're going to want to do is turn on lock alpha first off. Turn on lock alpha or else your life would be extremely hard. Turn on lock alpha and find like a color that is a similar hue to the area of the light art, like is encompassing like the skin of the face if you're coloring in the jawline, but much darker. And I try to keep this a pretty high saturation to not like sap color out of the piece. Sometimes I'll hue shift it as well, especially for skin. I'll shift it a little bit more towards red to make sure that they don't look like really washed out or really like, for some reason their skin looks really yellow, because that makes people look like zombies, and that's, no, don't make your characters look like zombies unless they're actually zombies. So like, just pick a color that's, for skin, pick a color that's a little bit red. Otherwise you can do whatever. Find something that looks good. And generally this will be a little bit darker, still pretty high saturation. For really, really dark areas, I will often make this like either the same color as the, like if you're shading dark hair, for example, or if you're doing the line art, coloring the line art for a really dark section of like dark hair, I sometimes won't even go any darker. I'll just color pick the darkest color straight off and use that as my line art color, or I'll even take a color that's a little bit lighter, just so that the detail in the line art doesn't get too lost, and like areas that might be lighter that I'm gonna color with the same color of the line art color are not too different from the line art color, because you kind of want to just make the whole piece look nice. You know, you might have to repick a color a couple times, but that's okay. That's okay. After that, I will add finishing touches. I call that to make you feel productive. It actually works pretty well, because you're like, I'm on finishing touches. That sounds really good, like you're almost done. You are almost done. I'll do a number of things here. First, I'll color pick some of the colors from the hair and draw in a couple extra strands. This really adds a lot of detail, and especially if your character has messy hair, it totally conveys like that their hair is messy a lot better. Even if they don't have super messy hair, it just looks kind of nice. I also create an additional layer and draw in some really subtle sparkles around the most reflective areas. Usually this layer I put on the layer mode of add, and like turn it down to a pretty low opacity just to make the sparkles kind of sparkly but also pretty subtle. And lastly, to add life to the character's eyes, I will take white on a layer on top of everything and add a couple little white dots in my character's eyes to make them look like a real person and not dead inside. Don't make your characters look dead inside, unless that's what you're trying to do. Yep. Now, if you want to add some sort of background and you haven't already, do it now. A really good way to make simple but really nice looking backgrounds is through the power of stock photos. So find some stock that like you're allowed to use and that fits sort of your picture and go for it. I normally try to use them to frame the face, like adjust them around until you find a place where like the face really contrasts in the back, like the character's face is really light, find a part of the stock photo that's dark, or find a stock photo that's dark, and if they have a pretty dark face, find one that's light, or wherever your focal point is. It's usually a face, but wherever your focal point is, try to utilize it to bring that focal point out. And, you know, adjust it around. Normally I'll put a stock photo like on top of a block of color, like a textured stock photo on top of a block of color, and on like opacity or multiply usually work, or maybe a combination of some of those, and just fiddle around with it until I find something that I like. Make sure that whatever the rules for the stock photo are, that you respect them. A lot of artists, or a lot of stock photo artists, either like want you to pay for their stock, so pay for their stock if they want you to pay for their stock, or they'll just say, even if it's free stock, they'll say like, please, you know, like link me to the picture when you're done, or, you know, please credit me by doing X or whatever. So just make sure you follow their rules, because otherwise you might get in trouble, and that's not good for you or for them. So just don't get in trouble. After you're done, make sure to sign the piece with your signature, whatever it is, so that, you know, your name's on the piece, and so that art thieves, I've never actually had anything stolen, thank God, but just in case, your signature's on there, so if it's on another part of the internet, people know it's yours, even if, and because it's just like sort of a nice gesture to say, whoa, I'm done. That's sort of good. I'm done now. Yay. Anyway, lastly, step 10 is color corrections. So, my fire alpaca, I don't know about yours, but my fire alpaca is kind of dumb and does not display colors quite properly. It normally displays them as much brighter than they actually are. And since I like really bright saturation things, it really sucks to, you know, get all my colors right, you know, save my picture, upload it, and then I upload it to like DeviantArt or somewhere, and it's really, really dull, and like all the colors are really dull. I'm like, what happened? It's fire alpaca. It's fire alpaca being dumb. So here, even if your program does display colors correctly, sometimes you want to color correct anyway. I use GIMP for this. GIMP is another cool free program. You can draw on it. I don't draw on it. I draw on Fire Alpaca. I like Fire Alpaca's tools better, but you can draw on it. I use GIMP. It's another nifty free program. It's also linked in the description. Lots of links in the description today. And so I will open my, you know, saved picture in GIMP, and I will use various tools under the colors menu until I get like a color balance that I like. So I don't know what all of these are called, but you can sort of see me opening various things here. Things like brightness, contrast are really good if you want to bring up your contrast, and things like, I think there's a thing called color balance. It might be called hue saturation. It's probably called hue saturation. It's probably called, I think I also use a thing called color balance that's different, but just screw around with things. I don't really know how to color correct. I'm not like a professional, so just make it look nice. But don't overdo it, because that can look kind of weird. Just figure out to sort of make sure the color palette of your picture is all harmonious and nice looking, and sort of re-emphasize it, especially because sometimes colors get lost in the wind, or things that you don't want to have happen show up, and so it just kind of can fix any coloring discrepancies, I guess, that you might have made. So now you're done. After you save that as your final picture, you're done, and you have a really cool piece of art, I hope. I hope you found something useful here. I don't know if you did. This is sort of me just rambling. I hope you found something useful here. Do let me know if you have any additional questions. I kind of talk quickly and I stutter a lot, kind of, and I know that like my audio is not the best, so if either I didn't explain something very well or you just couldn't understand what I said, please do ask. You know, I'm a nice person, I'm friendly, I hope. I'm kind of awkward, but I try to be a nice person. So, yeah, just hit me up with those. You can put them in the comments. You can, you know, send me a note in DA, or a message on Tumblr, or an ask on Tumblr, or really anything, anywhere. And I will try to respond to you and help you. Yeah, so in the meantime, good luck, have fun, and don't die. Oh, also, if you have any, like, suggestions for things you want me to cover in the future, I don't know how much bandwidth I'd have to do that, but if you have, like, you want me to make a color theory tutorial or something, you do ask, and I will try to get something done for you, because I have no life besides art and video games. So just let me know what you want to see, and speed paints or tutorials or anything. So yeah, good luck, have fun, don't die.